Well, hey there, Amy. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's so great to have you. And I know my audience is really going to enjoy our conversation. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you and let you share a little bit more about your story, and then we're going to chat.
Okay. Thank you so much. It's good to see you again.
You too.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, my story, I'll give the little cliff notes of it and really like what I've been focused on. Um, Very early on when I became chemically dependent on alcohol, I absolutely knew that a top-down approach was not going to work for me. And I was met with so much resistance, or I don't know if my parts were meeting it with resistance. And then I was also being met with resistance in all of the different modalities that were out there that were there to, help me live this life. But the life that I was seeing did not feel like the life that I actually wanted to live. And so for about 2 years during that chemical dependency, I tried to kill myself because I just was like, this isn't going to work. And but the whole entire time while I was in that phase, I was also writing my regrooving methodologies in my body of work. And so I was in treatment centers and I was having my notebooks out and I'm like, okay, like the nervous system, attachment, like parts work, like all of these things combined, I think I can create a new way of life for myself this way. And so since 2016, when I did stay stopped, I got all those notebooks together. And about 3 months after I stayed stopped drinking, I started, I was living my regrooving lifestyle, and then I started serving others with the same. And so my recovery is so much based on the somatics of a body that was highly sensitive my entire life with, the pretty big traumas that happened to me as a little kid. And I had started on a spiritual journey, but of course, like my what really needed to be regrooved was my nervous system. And so my recovery is just so much based on parts work and my attachment wounds, and then like none of it's going to be possible unless my nervous system is wants to cooperate with it, right? So creating that flexibility in my system.
I love that so much. And we're going to get into all of it because everything you're saying is so valuable. And I think that it's not new to a lot of us probably, but the deep dive into it is like most of us are probably familiar with some of these terms that you're using. And, but to really get into a little bit more of it so that we understand like what parts work is and what it means to talk about our nervous system. Cause I think that can be like elusive, like a little bit, it's so
It's
big.
trendy right
Yeah,
now.
and we're like, oh, it's a nice Instagram plaque. So I do want to do that. But first, I wanted to just ask you to touch on something that I think is really important. And
Okay.
you can say as much as you want or as little. I don't want,
Wow. I'm
whatever's
open. Yeah.
comfortable for you. But
Yeah.
you mentioned that you had a lot of trauma, and I get that. We all know that now from science that addiction comes from trauma. We're not like
Yeah.
born that way. We get our brains, get trauma stains, that then lead us into lots of ways we want to escape that. But you mentioned that you have a system that's highly sensitive, but you've had that your whole life. So I'm just curious if you could maybe kind of float back and give us some examples of what that means. Like, how did you know your system was highly sensitive? Like maybe in your younger days. Like, what do you mean by that?
Thank you for asking that question. It's a great question. So, just to very simply, the way that it first showed up was through constipation. Like, I wasn't able to poop for until like regularly, like without some kind of supplement until like eighth or ninth grade. Like, it was something that I struggled with from infancy. So, there was a lot of enemas from a very young age. And it was like my body was just holding on so tight, not even wanting to let go of the toxins that needed to leave my body, right? Which was so stressful for my dad because my mom had split. And so, like, in that, whatever, like, the way that my system grooved in this, uh, with everyone so hyper alert, I started to feel like a burden very young. And so the way that I would protect myself in the part that I created, probably like the first memories I have of it at about 3 years old, was that I was reading the room so that I could make sure that I was not a burden, which meant that like I was reading the room through my physical body and I was consistently sick, which makes so much sense because my microbiome was not well. And so, and when we talk about highly sensitive people, if anyone identifies with that, it's like there's a felt sense that's happening in the body that people that are more on the numb side, or that they don't feel as much, or they're just not connected as much to the body, then they basically will gaslight you because they're just like, what do you mean? How do you feel like that? And so it was just a really interesting um pattern to understand that I had, and then all the ways that I adapted based on not really feeling understood and all the sensation that I felt in my body.
Hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that part. And I think just from that little bit, I know that's just probably one part or one way you were the one symptomatic experience that showed up to help you understand that you were highly sensitive. I really am intrigued by the way that you were able to, now maybe I'm sure it took you years to get there, but to identify that um that you believed you were a burden. I think this is the experience for so many, particularly women. I work with mostly women, some men, but mostly women. And I do think that this is a common belief that women have about themselves in a variety of ways. And it's interesting because maybe what if you have like an illness, or like that was an illness, that's the type of an illness. It wasn't your fault. I mean, there might have been things that it had happened to you related to trauma, or that you were doing or not doing that could have helped create the constipation. Yes, but like seemingly it wasn't your fault.
Not an
You had a
infancy.
situation,
Yeah.
right? But then even with a situation that wasn't your fault, that was a physical situation, you believed and internalized the belief that you were now a problem. You were a problem. You were a burden, even though like it wasn't really. Yeah, I mean, do you know what I mean? Like, am I making sense? It's like somebody who says like
Absolutely.
their child has diabetes, and then them turning into this belief. And a lot of times these beliefs come from external sources, right? So how we're treated, or what is said to us in those moments. If you have a caregiver that's constantly saying things like, oh my God, I can't believe I have to do this again, or I can't get to work on time because I have to do this thing again, or I have, if there are messages that are being shared externally, then we are going to manifest different beliefs about ourselves, like I'm a burden
Yeah. And I think
for
what's so
something that's
interesting.
not even your fault. Like it was a disease system that came on, right? And so I find this to be so interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that in too, because it's like a lot of times they weren't, well, I wasn't necessarily hearing those words. I could just feel the neuroception. So my nervous system, and neuroception basically means that like your body is constantly scanning the environment for safety or danger, with or without your conscious awareness. Okay. So it's like little tiny kids are scanning the environment for safety or danger, and they're literally just going off of the felt sense, and then they're like, something's wrong, and then the animal body alerts itself to something's wrong, and then when we become more verbal and have more thoughts, then we've created these ideas like, if I'm quiet, then I'll get my needs met. If I'm less trouble, if I don't complain, if I don't do this. And so we're trying to alleviate the stress that we feel in the home unconsciously by behaving in these ways, so that like, we're not noticed.
Right. But
Yeah.
then
And as a
the
mama, like, you get that, like, that could be, yeah.
but the
Exactly.
reason why you're scanning the room for safety is because you don't feel safe. And
Well, yeah,
so
but and then this is what's so fascinating, is because like there's no consciousness to it. Neuroception is just like happening all the time. And this is what I think is so interesting about relationships. It's like we can walk into a room and without any thought, our body neurocepts danger from a smell, from a taste, from something like
right.
that was familiar from the past.
Oh, I
Yeah.
totally get that. I do EMDR therapy, and I understand that, and I've seen it, and I experience it. I experience the somatic, what are you calling it? Interception,
Oh,
uh,
neuroception.
neuroception. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's a great term for me to know now, because like when I go, my energy field is very sensitive to particular kinds of personalities. So if I'm out socially, specifically men, who come into my space that are a certain kind of personality or have a certain way, immediately I have like that. neurointerception, I guess.
Yeah.
That feeling of like, yeah, I don't like you. Like, and I don't even
Yeah.
like, I might not even know you. I don't have any reason. So I understand that. I get that.
Yeah.
But what
Yeah.
you're also describing is from neurobeliefs that get formed from trauma, like around safety. Like if you live in an environment that's highly volatile or danger or like violent or lots of
Mm.
verbal abuse or whatever, if you're living in a volatile environment like that, children do internalize messages around safety and danger, even if those aren't said to you, or but they but they are. And then they get stored in that back part of your brain, those negative beliefs like I'm not safe or I have to protect myself. So no one said that to you, but you did get that from the way you were being raised. So I just think that's a cool
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing that part of your story. I really appreciate the vulnerability there. And I think that's really going to be relatable to a lot of people for maybe the first time, like almost an awakening to like, oh my gosh, like maybe that's why I always had chronic stomach problem, or headaches, or even menstrual cycle that is very, very
Mm.
difficult or
Mm.
painful. These physical manifestations of our feelings or our neurosystem are very, very real because we're not just robots. We're not robots, and we aren't just a brain and a heart and a foot. We're one entire body and system that's working all the time together. And
Yeah.
so all of those parts, of our body are working together. And you mentioned how this shows up in relationships. So I'd love to
Mm.
dive into that a little bit too, because I think that this is so critical because here we are, you running through life. And as a young person, most of us, or you specifically, are sharing how you were sensitive. Um, then that led into you using substances to help alleviate that pain or to escape your reality. And then now you get into a relationship, right? Or you start to enter into whether it's friendship or interpersonal relationships or even familial. Um, it creates, a back and forth, communication, respect or disrespect, or, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about what either your own personal experience or what you see in like your work about how this specifically kind of shows up. And I'd love to talk that out a little.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm just going to bring it all the way around from some of the things that you've shared as well. So we can just like really be cohesive in that. So for the listeners, it's like um, something that's really important is that we think it's our fault and it's not, right? So we're going around the world. You walk into a room and before you even have a thought, you're already like, nope, you close. So your system literally closes. And you may or may not have conscious awareness that that happened because there's a whole big party going on and you have your prettiest dress on and you're just like doing the thing and you're like you don't take the time to check in because you're at a party and you're doing the thing or you're on your first date with someone and you don't realize that right away you already closed because you neurocepted some kind of danger. It's fascinating to me because we get into our head and we're like, what's wrong? What did I do wrong? How can I fix this? What did I do this? And it's actually like, oh, can I take a breath here? Can
Mm-hmm.
I remind my body, like my body's scared, but I'm not,
Yeah.
right? In these moments. And this can be happening with your parents that you've known for your whole life. This could be happening with your partner who you've been sleeping next to for 25 years. This could be happening while you're swiping on the dating app. You can see something or sense something that's not in your conscious awareness, where suddenly you're on guard, you're bracing for impact, you're closing, and especially for the feminine bodied woman, like we're closing our heart off to receptivity. And then we're beating ourselves up because we've been taught, like, oh, you're supposed to be like this in relationship. And then on top of all of that, you're fully conscious and aware because you're not drowning it out with any kind of substance to, or you're actually there for the event. And what I find so interesting is that these little misses in our nervous systems are what cause the most parting of ways, divorcing, breaking up, etc., over long periods of time, where the two people just don't realize because they don't have a language for it yet that their systems just are continuously missing each other. And, you know, I walk a lot of people through either repair or through parting ways. And what's so fascinating is that how each individual system begins to heal. And then a tremendous amount of grief comes in because the body now is like danger to the person that they've been sleeping next to. But then they've done a cellular transformation where they've changed in such a big way, but they can't see their way together again. And so it's beautiful in some ways because then they get to go out and have, you know, really healthy conscious relationships. But I love spending time talking about this because we try to figure all of this out with our mind, and we're bypassing like these very natural ways that our nervous systems are missing each other. Just last night I was with a friend, a lover, and I said something to the effect of like, oh, like, you know, maybe we slow down while you're healing this particular he's while you're healing this particular closure that you're up to, that you haven't fully closed in another relationship, right? There's still some wounding there that he's aware of. And like 10 minutes later, he was like, what I just heard you say is you don't want to see me anymore because I need to have this figured out first. And I was like, that's not at all what I said, but I'm so glad you named it and actually said something. But he neurocepted from my like opening, basically, that I was about to leave him and that he was going to be rejected. And that was all through animal body. And then he's like, I'm just going to ask this question. I'm like, thank you. Oh, yes. Like lean in. Cause like there's no part of me that's saying that. Like we heal in relationship, but we don't always feel um, the confidence, the courage, or have access to the smarter parts of our brain to get those words out when we're feeling that with our intimate partners, with our parents, with our children, even with at work, everywhere. It's just like this is a whole thing. So I love teaching the awareness in the system. And then how do we actually get it out of our throat and communicate it in a clear, concise, compassionate way?
So much of that is so important for everyone to hear, and to just, I want you to almost like rewind and re-listen, because also what you're saying, and from my own training and how I've been taught to, is that we're in the back part of our brain a lot. You know, that's that reptilian amygdala, like less rational piece of our brain, fight or flight, all of that lives there. And so this front part, this cognitive part of our brain, often goes offline when we get activated in that way somatically. So if we're having an intercept with somebody or something sometime, even our own partner, I've been with my husband since I was 16 years old, right? We've been married a long 25 years. And this happens, you know,
Oh, yeah.
and we've done a tremendous amount of work, thank God, for really great therapy and like marriage counseling and stuff too, because I have watched um, that happen, and it took me a long time for me to identify that it happening in him, for me to be able to say like, oh, like his brain just went offline. And so it was almost animalistic, like you're mentioning. So for him, it's a very anxiety response, anxious response, which usually is related to fear. And so it starts to swirl, and we know anxiety just breeds more anxiety, right? And so then we're in that irrational part of our brain.
Yeah.
And if it lasts long enough, if we don't put a spoke in the wheel and intercept it ourselves, if we don't take an intentional effort to put a tool in to stop the swirl, I say, then
Yeah.
it's going your brain is going to go offline, and now you're stuck in this world, right? And so you're not going to be able to rationally understand or receive or listen to or communicate anything that you really are trying to say, like your partner just said, right? That was
Yeah.
actually extremely mature and so insightful on his part, which I think is rare. You know, like it's very, very insightful for him to be able to be able to have that thought, and then also have the courage to say that out of his mouth. Um, that which is, I think, where you're saying like most relationships get off track, and then one of those times, just one thing. So say that happened. You use that beautiful example. He didn't say that. He had the thought, so he went home with the thought. You didn't know. You carried on. you text him the next day, you're supposed to get together. Now he's pulling away. So he's like, well, he
Yeah.
doesn't want me,
Yep.
and starts to be a little weird. And you're like, what's going on? But you have zero idea that he's walking around with this thought that you don't want to be with him. Right.
Yeah.
And so you can see how in less sort of mature or healthy relationships, or with people who don't have access to those kinds of strengths internally, or have been taught that way, would very quickly go down the path to like, well, then that's it, forget it, we're done. And they might live like that for years,
Oh
years,
yeah, for
years
sure.
and years, raise their kids that way, and like all their whole lives be thinking, my wife doesn't really like me, she doesn't want me. And then
And the
the
masculine's
relationship.
worst thing is to be rejected. Right. And then it's this is so I always say, like, God played the biggest joke on us putting us together because like we're wired so differently. And so communication is absolutely necessary in these dynamics of relating because like we are so, if we don't have compassion for how differently we're wired, then it's always going to be the victim consciousness and the blame game and lashing and clashing and just all of the things. It's like, no, actually, you're very different than I am. Like, I'm going to take in all this information. It's better for you as the man in my life to focus on one thing, and I model that communication to everyone that I am relate to because I do not have an expectancy that people have learned this. I mean, the whole reason I started my business was healthy conscious relationships will change the world and it starts with you. Right. And so my personal responsibility was like, I practice this everywhere with my girlfriends, with my friends. And it's meant that I've parted ways with a lot of people because it was too much um, sensation to
Mm.
sit in these conversations. And I'm like, that's cool. Not everyone's supposed to relate this way. And if you're listening and you want to, like, it's so possible. But you are going to be the leader often in this way of modeling that type of communication.
Yeah, and I think it allows us the opportunity to express quite a bit of compassion for our fellows. Like when I was just sharing about in my relationship, like it took me probably decades, like a longer time than it should, to understand that part that was happening, that was happening to us, to him, and then us. I didn't, and so immediately for me, because of my own whatevers, I did turn that on myself, like, and some codependency issues that really needed to be worked on and like healed, where I was like constantly like, what did I do? Like running through the whole list, like what's going on? What did I say? When meanwhile, it had nothing to do with me. It's just that its brain was offline. And so now there was no, it was no rationalizing with him. Right. So once there was compassion on my end to be able to be like, oh, okay. And it's not like I could really do much about it, but I could at least know, I could know the thing, right? I could know that he's not purposely trying to hurt me or do the thing to me or whatever. He's just offline, right? And so
Yeah.
it takes a hot second to like figure that out. And honestly, maybe I could have an influence. Maybe I could say like, oh gosh, it seems like you're kind of in the swirl or whatever. A lot of times that's not going to work in my relationship, right? Because then that just activates him more, right? So
Yeah,
now I have to
absolutely. Yeah.
talk
Like a
about
man
it,
does not
right?
want to be told how he's
Right. And he's
feeling.
like,
No
why
one
me?
does.
Like now we're in anger and it's like everybody's upset. And I'm like, whoa, okay. But it does create an opportunity for a lot of compassion. Which,
Absolutely.
yeah, I love your mission for that. And I think that it does change relationships when we have deep insight and understanding into these things. And a lot of it is self awareness, which most people lack. Um, I'm curious, again, if you're willing, you
Yeah, of
just said
course.
something about having some relationships that you've had to let go and for a
Yeah.
variety of reasons. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share like an example of that. Like, what did that look like? Kind of like a little bit more dive deep into the story about why you had to do that and what was going on.
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, I mean, so at this point in my development, like I do require a lot of communication with the people that I relate with. And I'm like, I'm living my life, and I'm just like, I have a finite amount of time. I'm so passionate about my work. And so it's like, I've, I've just been very clear, like, I'm so straightforward. I just say the thing. And I've been like that way before I stopped drinking. And in so many of my friendships, it's been too sensational for them to hold my directness. And there's been there's been many times where um I would go back into that young child. So this is great because now we can feel this all the way through. I would start to sense that they couldn't hold my directness. I
Mhm.
would start to shut down and then be over accommodating to their need. And this is like with girlfriends. Now, of course, with
Right.
partners as well, but let me just name it with girlfriends,
Right.
right?
No, I love this.
And so, it started to become this thing of like, I'm not going to stop being me so that you're comfortable. And I love you so much. But until you have more capacity for our friendship at a nervous
Mhm.
system level, then we can come back around. And if not, it's totally okay, you know?
Yeah, we need to say more about this.
Okay.
Um, so I had a similar experience, and I don't know if it's exactly the same, but I tend to be kind of an all out kind of person, like a little too much, too much maybe, or what people would call that,
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
direct as well, very open and wanting. I think it's like just because I have a very strong desire for realness. I don't want to hang out with people. I was just talking about this morning. I don't want to hang out with people who aren't willing to sit and talk about the tough stuff of life. Like, I don't want to have us smile through our coffee the whole time. Like, I want to
No.
hear about how you hate your kids sometimes, or how your husband was a jerk last night, or not the whole. I mean, I'm not saying we just sit around and talk about all the negative stuff, but I don't want my time, like you're saying, it's finite, to go to people who aren't going to be in real life with me. A back and forth, right? Like,
Yeah.
I want to know yours, I want you to receive mine, because to me it's just too fake and I'm too old for that now. And so, yeah, so for me that looked like, let me just share, and then maybe you can share more about yours. Like, when I was
Sure.
young and I had a baby, I had 3 kids in 4 years. It was crazy. I just got sober 6 months prior to that. It was a whole lot of craziness. And I would go to these, obviously I never had a baby before. I would go to these like play groups and stuff with these women that I met in like the breastfeeding support group. So they were like all had babies at the same age. And then I started to hang out with like women at our gym and just people in my, in that time. We'd have these like play dates where we'd kind of just bring, our babies, our kids or whatever. And I would say a thing, like I just mentioned, something that was very true. And I would get like the glassy eyed stares, or like people would say, oh, I can't relate to that, or no, that's never happened to me. And then I'd be like, oh, okay, like we don't say that here. We're not allowed to say that here. And then so I learned, then the behavior became, we're not allowed to say the truth in these groups.
Yeah.
That was my experience and how that really first showed up. It probably was before that, but most recently, I guess when my kids were little, that's how that showed up. So
Yeah.
I'm curious about that for you. Like,
Yeah. I'd love that
is
too,
that what it
because
looked
it,
like for you? Are you saying your
oh,
girlfriends, like when you said something true or honest about your life, they didn't really want to hear it? Or were they
it,
responding with things like, oh, I've heard like breathing exercises really work, or things like that?
like telling you how to fix it.
Like,
I mean, through the years, I've experienced all of it. And then as they've become more attuned to their systems as well, then they've also just been like they literally freeze when I'm not direct. And then it takes them days to get back. And so the relationship ends up not being well because there's so many freezes and then waiting for someone to come back, and then a nervous system freezes again and waiting for someone to come back, and I'm like, this is just so much work because the words can't come through just yet. Because a more appropriate thing at like your breastfeeding group, when you're like, yes, and like, my nipple's raw and he bit me yesterday and da da da, and everyone else is like, oh, because they don't have the capacity to actually be that honest.
right,
Like, that's has nothing to do with you, that has everything to do with their capacity.
right.
And then you choose like, yo, this is not these aren't my people. I need to be talking to the people that are busting our nipples out and showing them to each other, you
Yeah.
know?
Or being able to say, like, I actually don't really like my kid. Like, this is really
Yeah,
hard. This is really hard. I didn't know it was going to be this hard. And that's when a lot of them were like, oh, like I can't, and I'm like, oh, like this is just my experience. I'm just kind of like, this is the truth. And nobody really wanted to
absolutely.
hear that. And it's so hard. I feel like women are like the worst at this. I
Well,
think
and
men get better.
abandonment wounds and all of the things, it's just like we come in with all of our stuff from our childhood, and then we're just like, because I have abandonment wound, and like that's my original incident. That's what everything goes back to. So when
Right.
another nervous system freezes, and I've been the causation of that, then I'm immediately alerted to I need to save this relationship because they're going to leave me, and really just their nervous system's frozen. And so then I would just start to ask, like, hey, do you need some time to come back, or what's going on here?
Yeah.
Right. But
Yeah.
it wasn't always like that. It would usually be like, oh, let me just have 17 glasses of
Oh,
wine.
right. Right. You have to learn that, right? I mean, this takes time. This is stuff that happens over decades,
Oh yeah.
This is through all of the emotional sobriety work and through our own personal healing. Clearly, we need layers of our treatment, right? We need therapy, we need 12-step, we need quit lit, we need Reiki and complementary medicine and all kinds of really good things that are going to really help us understand and heal our own wounds and then be able to be in relationship with others. And what's beautiful about as we start to learn it, which again does take a significant amount of time. So if you're not there, if you're sitting here thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm not, like it's okay. It's
Oh yeah.
okay. You're okay. And just because you don't know how to solve it or don't know what to do doesn't mean that there isn't somebody out there that can help you with that. Like Amy or
Yeah.
your therapist or whoever. It doesn't mean there isn't somebody out there who does know how to help you. And so that's really important to note, I think.
Yeah, and I consider myself a beginner all of the time because I just never know how my system, like I just drove out to California, and so it's been on the road for several days, and it's like I have a lot less capacity because I haven't slept like 8 hours in like 5 days. And so I'm just walking around the world with my friends, seeing everyone from San Francisco and all my friends, and I'm just like, I have a little bit less capacity right now. And I just name it right away because I'm a beginner and I don't want to. I'm like, if I say something really weird, it's because like I don't have like the filters of having a good night's sleep and those biological imperatives for me to function at my best so that I can actually get access to that part of my brain. It's just
Yeah.
like,
Right in the
I mean, I'm
beginning,
just so human.
right? Let's just be real about it. In the beginning, I learned too that it was really like when I was working on that relationship stuff and trying to break free from the chains of kind of codependency and also like my own nervous system response of like, this is about you, this is your fault, you did something wrong. I learned or I was taught to like ask good questions, like when that stuff is coming up in me and I'm getting like sick to my stomach, or I'm starting to feel like, oh, like what's going on? I learned to just say to him, like, hey, I'm feeling like you're not yourself today. Like it seems like maybe you're like not in your best way. Did I do something to upset you? Or is there some part of this that's about me? Because
Yeah.
that was my first response for most of
Yeah.
my younger years until I learned how to like that I didn't need him to do that anymore. But I do think it's important that it's okay to ask, to just
Yeah.
say to your friend or your mom or your sister or your husband, whoever you're with, if there's something going on and you're sitting there obsessing about it, it's okay to say to them like, hey, I'm starting to feel a little bit like anxious or uncomfortable. And I'm just wondering, like, is there something that's between us, or is there something that I did to upset you? And then that gives that person the opportunity to say, no, like I'm worried about work thing, or no, I don't have a lot of capacity today, or I'm tired. Or if there is something they can say, yeah, like I was really thinking about that conversation we had earlier and my feelings are still hurt, or
Yeah.
I'm angry, and I'm like, okay, now we have a real thing and it's not just about you,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Well, and then we just don't go down all those rabbit holes of assumptions. And what just pains me so much is that, it's safer. So, I'll just bring in parts work since we had dropped that earlier. But basically, with every big incident that happens in our life and a trauma wound, like we'll create a part for the listeners to know, we'll create a protective part of us. Like the part of me that drank, we consider that a firefighter, right? It was there to just like put the fires out, make everything okay, like make the things go away. And then we have these managerial parts of us as well. And we have so many parts of us. And it's like these parts come forward literally in service to survival. It makes so much sense. But we don't have access to ourself that's connected to all the things that are bigger than us. the self that can ask your beautiful partner and say like, hey, I feel kind of weird, what's going on here? Like it that takes practice. It absolutely takes practice because these parts, all they want to do is keep us alive, and they serve a very beautiful purpose. And we spend so much time making those parts wrong, and it's like, no, there's nothing wrong with that part. It has kept you alive until now. But we can probably reassign it a job, like you reassigned yours, the job of like, I'm going to name it. I'm going to name it every time I feel weird. And that part that used to be codependent or begging for some attention or whatever however we behaved, now is like, hey, let's say something. Right. And like you have that like dialogue internally in your mind, body, spirit. And you're like, I'm a new person. Like, this is amazing. That ruminating thinking is gone. And now I have these clear, concise, compassionate words coming from my own mind.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
And then also to continue on with that conversation, when you learn, when you do this kind of work, this like internal family systems work, either with a guide of a therapist or in your own personal journey, what I learned and what we learned in our relationship as well is when we are in any kind of conflict or when there's a conversation that needs to happen or any kind of feelings, we get to decide which part we want to show up. And so, like for my husband, a lot of times it was like his go-to was anger, and it would come out. A lot of it was fear and anxiety based, but it would show up as anger, right? And so his angry part was in charge, and
Yeah.
it might have been the little boy part too that was like feeling a lot of things. Who knows? I don't know exactly, but like the angry part would show up, and then that's what would get expressed. And so for me, that's a quick shutdown. Like that's immediately I'm offline. I'm done now. I cannot receive that. I can. I'm not listening anymore. I'm not going to be able to respond. And so what we had to learn, what we learned was we get to decide which part do you want to be in charge today in that
Yeah.
interaction? Do you want your angry part to be in charge, or do you want your strong, confident, compassionate husband part to be in charge? Um,
Yeah.
and so I think that's really important in relationships because this is an ongoing thing all the
Yeah.
time. And
Absolutely.
when you learn
Yeah.
how to
And
when you learn that you do have some control over that, I think it can be very valuable in working on healthy interactions.
yeah. Yeah. And the way that I like to frame it for myself is like I have choice here.
Right.
And I'm not always going to make the right choice,
No.
like I'm
Well,
just
our
not.
counselor used to say, like, when this happens again, like not if,
Yeah.
like not if, it's when this
Yeah.
interaction happens again, because it will, or when you
Yeah.
mess up again,
Yeah.
which
Even with
part do you
what
want to
my
be in charge?
totally which part, and like you have that choice. And there's something so, people are in recovery I hear people ask, like, talk about freedom. I want freedom. I want freedom. And
Mhm.
I'm like, this is freedom. Right? Because like when I can see the fork at the road and then I can actually be in my body to like make that choice, let's say 80% of the time, then I'm just like, oh, like I didn't have a nervous system that could stop, right? Like I downregulated with alcohol and I was constantly in a sympathetic fight flight place. Like I was stuck there. My vagal brake just did not know how to release. And so I just didn't get a lot of parasympathetic or rest and relax until I really dedicated myself to this practice. And I say it's like a way of life. It's not like a one and done. It's just like, this is how I wake up every day, and then I recommit to it halfway through the day or sometimes an hour into the day, especially like lately when I've been tired and going out every night because there's a lot of good music in town. But it happened last night with a friend where we missed each other in communication because it was late at night when he had relayed a message to me. And what I found was so interesting is that I left him a voice note, and I'm like, I feel like we missed each other, and I'm not sure if I'm invited to come tonight or not. But what I what I saw in my pattern of having this conversation with him is that I waited until like 8 o'clock at night, which is definitely an old behavior. And so I called myself on that too. I'm like, I apologize for waiting this long to get clear,
Yeah.
and let's get clear. And so this morning he called and he's like, you're invited tonight, just to be clear, you're on the list, da, da, da. Right? But like these kind of things in my past life or before I did this work, those things would be, I would just have hundreds and thousands of messes like that. like little communication misses, and then holding all that energy in my body and then ruminating about it as, are they mad at me? Did I do this? Da, 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 da. And like that was just the way that I lived all the time. So it's just like da, 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 da. It's like, oh,
I
exhausting.
think basically that's a summarization of everything we just talked about. And I think that's how a lot of us are. We're just constantly in that like, ah, like until we learn how to do this, what these things that we're describing, and we make it our natural way. It's not our natural way. It's never going to be our natural way, I don't think. But until we make it an option, and we make it the first choice, to go to, and that we understand that we are a free, and that we do have a great deal of power in all of this, that we are powerful in all of this because we get to advocate for ourselves in this way. We get to speak up and say like, hey, totally, I totally messed up. I waited too long to call you. And that is the personal responsibility and accountability that comes from doing the emotional sobriety work regularly and for a long time. And once, I do think that once we have a mix of this, like an understanding of our nervous system, parts work, and then this personal responsibility and power piece, boy, that is like a force to be reckoned with. Like what, that is a power package right there. And then we
Yeah.
can change the world. I love this so much.
Yeah. Well, and your husband, and like I just even hearing from when we talked last till now and just feeling it in your system, I can just really feel that like you're solid there, and that's gorgeous.
Well, one thing it's been magical. Like in the last few years for me, just in my personal journey, yes, in my marriage and in my parenting, all of the things, plus I'm getting older. I just feel like this release has really happened for me. That's been interesting. And a lot of it is a codependency type of thing, which I was not aware. We hear this word related to addiction a lot of the time, but I always think of it related to like, if you had parents who were addicts, or like just different. For me, it just didn't seem like relatable for me in my life, but that's
Hmm.
what it was. And
Yeah.
I just recently kind of made the connection on that. Like, oh, like that's what I was doing
Mm.
all of that time. I literally was adjusting myself all of the time, all day long to other people's feelings. And that is extremely exhausting. And
Oh
it's
yeah.
also not very free. And so now it's so different because I just kind of run my life. I just show up. I mean, I have a general idea like what I'm doing. I communicate with my people. I'm obsessed with my children, like probably too much, but like I'm obsessed with them and I want to be with them every second and just soak all of our goodness in and our family. But like, when other things go on, my feelings might get hurt at times or whatever, but I'm so capable of just kind of releasing that now, or I'm able to say like, like I had an interaction with my middle daughter. She's 19 years old. We had a situation that happened with, it's a long story and we don't have time, but, and my feelings were hurt. I was hurt. And I knew it. I knew exactly what it was. And I thought, okay, so I had a minute to think about how I wanted to handle that. So I felt like I didn't want to punish her or hurt her. I just felt that like my response needed to be appropriate in a way that let her know that like I received what she said and that also my feelings were hurt, you know, that she didn't need to do anything about it. But like I was able to express that in a way that was like, wow, like that, that's really hurtful, and she did receive it and did have a big reaction, right? Like anybody would, around like, because she didn't understand because she's 19 and like, you know, she didn't get it, and so she was justifying constantly.
Mm.
We got into this whole big back and forth where I was able to just kind of stay in it and be like, you don't have to say anything else. Like, there's nothing you can do at this point. It's been done. You made a choice. My feelings were hurt. I felt it was important for you to know that. That's it. That's
Yeah.
it. I didn't need to do anything else or punish her or make her make a different decision or, talk to someone else about it. I just kind of like but she had a hard time, because it
Sure.
was a lot to
Yeah.
process, but she did. And we kind of moved on. And then that's it. Like, I'm like, well, I bet the next time if that comes up again, I'm going to guess she's probably going to be more thoughtful. She's probably going to be like, hmm, like, maybe not make that same choice. I don't know
Yeah.
how it'll go, but
Yeah.
she
We'll
might be,
see.
now she's had this experience that informs her next experience, right? And I'm
Absolutely.
gonna guess it implanted something in her mind, because I feel like it probably did, to inform her that making that kind of a choice could be hurtful to my mom or someone else, you know?
Yeah,
And so I'm like,
absolutely.
okay, cool. Like that's what that was. So that's like beautiful. I don't need to wallow around. But then later I was like, we were hanging out and I don't know. I
Yeah.
love the heck
Well,
out of
it's a
her.
form of repair, that
Yeah. So it's really cool.
that's like the modeling that,
Yeah.
we're here to do, if
Yeah.
that's what we're here
I
to
love
do.
that part of the stage. It's been so fun. I mean, I need to, I just love, like, especially with her, because she's like, she's like my lawyer, right? So she's constantly like, wanting to have these like interactions and like, and it's intense. And it happens in all of her life, all of the parts, right? And so a lot of times she's constantly telling me stuff, but my advice a lot of the time is, um stop talking, um stop talking, say nothing, slow down. Like, so I've tried to help her, and now I see her doing it. It's so cool.
Yeah.
It's like boundary. I just helping her understand boundaries. Like, you're allowed to just receive it and say nothing,
Mm.
or say your part, and then like keep repeating that if the person keeps coming after you, right? Or say, I'm actually not going to continue this conversation. And like that's okay. And that's been such a cool thing to like share with her at such a young age. And I'm really hoping it translates into
Yeah.
healthier relationships moving forward.
Yeah, it already
Anyway, thank
is.
you so much, Amy, for your time. Man, this conversation is beautiful. I know it's so valuable. So if
Yes.
people want to interact with you or get a hold of you, where do you like to do that?
Instagram is the best place to get a hold of me, at Regulate with Amy, but I'm also on Facebook, LinkedIn, all the other places, YouTube, and everything is Regulate with Amy.
Perfect. I'll make sure I link all that
Yeah.
below. And it's just been a pleasure. So thank you again for
Yeah.
coming
Good to
back and
see
being
you.
such a big friend to the Confident Sober Women podcast. And, I hope we can do it again.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Thank you so much.